Good morning everybody and welcome to the Haweswater Reservoir. Now if you watched my video a couple of weeks ago, you may remember I was at Elterwater and I was there looking for compositions because the River Brathy is a glaring omission from my portfolio. And I've come here to Haweswater for exactly the same reason. I don't have a good shot of the reservoir, not one that's portfolio quality anyway. And part of my problem is I'm not sure 100% that I've got my composition right. Now I'm shooting this morning from Whiteacre Crag. This is generally where I shoot. You've got a lovely view of the Rig and Riggingdale that runs up to High Street. And my usual composition here focuses in on the Rig and uses the island, the Rig and Harterfell behind it. And we have a little bit of the ridge, rough crag that runs up to the summit of High Street in the shot as well. But I'm not entirely sure that that is my ideal composition. The composition I think is okay, but I just never seem to be able to get a combination of the light that I need along with the lovely reflections of the rig. So today I'm going to spend some time trying to look for alternatives, and this is a particularly important shot for me, because this is the closest of the large bodies of water to my home. I live about 5-6 miles in that direction, and it's one of those compositions that really should feature in my Hand of Man project because this is a reservoir, and so that makes it, well, triply important, I suppose. I've moved on from Whiteacre Crag now, and what I'm doing is I'm climbing up the old Corpse Road, and as you come higher and higher and higher there are more and more vantage points for which to shoot this end of the reservoir. And at the first point here I've got quite a nice shot of the Rig and rough crag leading up to High Street, and then with the small island in the bottom right hand corner of the frame. I'm about 35mm at the moment. I'm going to take this shot and then I'm going to put the wide angle lens on, and I'm going to go for a wider shot that includes the road that runs around this end of the reservoir and Harterfell as well. And then I've done that, I'm going to go up to this small mound on my right hand side, your left, and I'm going to try and get a different shot from a slightly different angle. Now that I've come away from the edge of the reservoir, typically the wind has dropped and the surface of the reservoir is now like glass. Some absolutely beautiful reflections. Now I find when you've got reflections as good as this, I want to be down at the edge of the lake to make the most of them. You kind of lose their impact when you come a bit higher. So when the wind picks up, that's when I tend to come up into the hills to get away from the lakes, and you can still get some nice shots. You're not so dependent on the reflections. You can shoot the sort of wider landscape a bit more. And that's what I'm doing up here. I am at 24mm, and I'm, got really quite a lot of the scene in from here. But yeah, disappointing that I'm up here when the reflections are down there. I've come a little bit higher now, and to be honest with you, the composition hasn't changed a great deal, but I've now got some rocks in the foreground which I can use as a little bit of foreground interest. Now I do feel that I'm starting to include too much in the frame, and perhaps by moving away from the reservoir we're losing some of that impact. But it also might be the case that now we have a slightly wider view, you can see more of the shape of the reservoir, and that makes for a better shot. The other thing I'm starting to think about is where I want the light. Now the light is rising over my left shoulder. It's about 7:30, 7:45 now. And we're at the southern end of the reservoir, and it's in quite a lot of shade. And what I actually want, I think, is the sun in completely the opposite direction. I want it more towards the northwest, so that's putting light on these hills here on the left hand side, and I'll get a bit of shadow along the ridge to create a bit more depth to the image. And so this looks like a potential for a bit later in the year, closer to the summer solstice, when the sun is setting further to the north. I'm not far from the top of the old Corpse Road now, and I've come to an area where there's a little cairn that's always intrigued me. And I think that this can add an extra dimension to the shot. It's actually working quite well, and that's because now that the sun is a bit higher, I've actually got light on the foreground. So the fact that there are some dark shadows in my background doesn't really matter all that much, and actually what it's doing is it's adding quite a nice contrast between the light on the foreground and the shadows in the background. I still have the rig in this shot, but in order to get separation between my foreground and the front of it, I've had to set my tripod as pretty high up. So that's one of the advantages of lugging that great heavy tripod about with me. As I was shooting a little bit of B-roll then, I spotted another opportunity to get a shot of the rig and rough crag and the island. So I'm just going to grab that now. Now this has the advantage of having a little bit of foreground in. The cairn's not in this shot anymore. I've just got a little bit of the foreground cutting in, but I've still got great separation between the foreground and the rig from here. So this is another potential. I was just about to pack up my gear and head on to my next location, which is only 100 yards over there. And I thought, I'd better quickly grab a shot for Instagram. So I was looking for a composition, and I thought about a shot where I fitted the cairn in the gap between the hills and the rig. And that looked quite nice. And then I thought, well, I better try and get the tripod as high as I possibly can to try and get some separation between the foreground and, again, the rig. And even with my tripod at the highest setting I can possibly get it to and use it comfortably, and remember I'm 6'5", so you can add another couple of feet from the reach of my arm, even then I'm still getting the foreground just cutting in slightly to the reflections. But nevertheless, I think this could be a really good shot. Now unfortunately I can't see very well on the LCD, so I think it's focused okay, I think it's framed correctly, but I just won't know until I get home and can see it on the computer. And it's not just cairns we've got up here. As I get closer to the top of the old Corpse Road, we've got some old derelict cottages. And this is kind of a double whammy for the hand of man. Not only have we got the reservoir, which is man-made, but then we've also got these derelict buildings. And this composition is something that I've tried before, but I've never been up here with the big Ben Road tripod. And once again, I think it benefits from being able to get slightly higher and create a little bit more separation between the rig and the foreground. Now, before, when I was shooting down a bit lower, closer to the reservoir, where we had a lot of shade on the end of the reservoir, I was starting to think that I wanted the light off to the northwest, so a sunset close to the middle of the day. But now that I'm up here and I've got these buildings, we've got this lovely light on the buildings, a little bit harsh, but you know, certainly I can work with it. And that's created some lovely shadows that are running through the frame as well. And the frame's reasonably balanced. I've got the building on one side on the left, I have the island on the right, and then I've got the rig in the middle. Now the island and the building they're not balanced. The building's obviously a lot larger in the frame than the island is, so that does create a little bit of imbalance in the frame, but other than that, I don't think it's a bad composition, so this one has potential. I've still got quite a way to go to get to the top of the old corpse road, but this is my final destination for today. And I've now come up above the second of these derelict cottages that sit above Haweswater. And again, same as before, the trick here is trying to get the camera as high as I possibly can to give that separation between the building in the foreground and the rig in the distance. And it's as simple as that. Now, I'm a little bit concerned about this composition. I think it's probably too central. We've got the cottage and we've got the rig, and they're very close together, and there's not a lot else around the other side of the frame. I have taken a portrait orientation shot of this, which might work better, and it's actually a copy of another shot that I took about 7 or 8 years ago here, and it's hanging on my wall at home. So I know it works, but yeah, so this is going to be my final shot for today, and then I'm gonna head home. Right, so that's it from me for today. I'm going to head home in a minute, but I will just say this before I go. If you think there have been too many of these sorts of videos recently where I'm going out and trying to find compositions that I'm going to shoot at a later date, I think unfortunately that is the reality for me. If I'm going to be able to create the quality of images that I'm going to need to be able to survive as a landscape photographer, then it's all in the preparation, it's all in the groundwork. This is where I earn my money. But you know, that being said, it's still been one of the best mornings since I left my job at the end of last summer. You know, the sun's out, the birds are chirping, it's just a glorious morning. What's not to like?